Really marvelous the way things moved. Not one brain was doing that. There was a lot of brains working together.
The workers became an integrated part of the great machine, and the management set the speed it ran at without discussion or negotiation, for unions were forbidden. The men faced new pressure as the final assembly line beat out the rhythm for the whole factory. There was no way they could stop or slow it down. Few stood the pace and din for long. Men tried it for a few weeks and then quit. But Ford had an answer. The company was making record profits. The time taken to build each car had dropped to 1.5 hours. So he could afford to raise pay. When he announced he was doubling wages to the unheard-of level of $5 a day, the factory was besieged by applicants. Red Cole was 18 when he started at Ford.
The thing about Mr. Ford that stuck in my mind mostly was that he started to pay $5 a day. And Mr. Ford to me was like a god. He was like a god, and because he had the control of so many thousands of people, and he had them in such order, the lines, the production lines, the coming and going, the shifts, 3 shifts, 8 hours each shift, days, afternoons, and midnights. And everything to me was so clockwork that I was so proud to be a part of it. I loved it.
By 1920, Detroit was a boom town. Its population had grown 4-fold since 1900. Other car makers adopted the Ford method. His recipe, mass production, low costs, high wages, was creating not only cheap cars, but well-paid workers. Ford built a new factory, which was the largest in the world. At the River Rouge plant, coal, iron, sand and rubber were delivered at one end, and 2,500 Model Ts a day streamed out of the other. Up to 80,000 men worked there.
I was lost, you know. I was really lost with the size of it and the noise of it and where you hung your clothes, where you eat your lunch, where did you put your lunch. You just didn't know, and you was afraid to go any place. Seeing these fellas doing one thing, somebody else is doing another thing, and all this different machinery. It was amazing to see all this. It was amazing.
Above all, it was the constant supply of new men arriving in Detroit that made it possible. The company set the terms. Provided they worked fast and obeyed orders, they got the wages. Over 70% were recent immigrants. So the company had its own language schools.
I fill the kettle with water.
And Ford played the different groups off against each other. Italians and Poles, Germans and Greeks, white American and black, to keep up the speed.
They said, nigger, if you don't want to get that production, we got some hunkies out here on Miller Road will do it. They'd go back to a southern white guy and they'd say, look, if you crackers can't get this production, we got some Dagos and some niggers out there on Miller Road can do the same. We'll take your job.
Ford's private security force, the Plant Protection Service, kept discipline. Anyone who recruited for the unions was fired. Company spies kept a lookout for those considered to be troublemakers. Instead, Ford stressed all the material benefits high pay could bring. Workers were encouraged to put part of their wages aside each week towards their own car in a company-run savings scheme.
You know, you can afford this, you can afford that, you can afford a new car.
In 1924, the 10 millionth Model T rolled off the line. Ford's advertising department made the most of it. As the car was driven from coast to coast, it crossed a country that was being transformed by the moving assembly line. For America, the 1920s were the start of a consumer society in which a whole range of new products came within reach of ordinary people. Factories now turned out furniture and ready-made clothes. Electric appliances were cheaper than ever before. The cycle had started. Mass production was feeding mass consumption, leading to yet more production. The radio had almost as great an impact as the car, bringing advertising and popular music into the home. When a Philadelphia company wanted to make the cheapest wireless yet, they took on a new workforce. They needed no experience or electrical knowledge, so long as they were nimble enough to put the small parts together. Margaret Colombo's only qualification was that she'd played the mandolin.
He looked at my hands, and I had the long fingers. And believe it or not, when I went there was 3 others besides me, and I was the 4th one went in there, and they all had long fingers. Yeah. Mm-hmm. He knew that's what he wanted. He wanted the fingers. Yeah.
The work was so easy to pick up that Philco workers sometimes swapped jobs just to vary the routine.
When you're sitting in one spot and you're doing the same job for a couple of hundred sets, that's a lot of, and it got boring, and some of them just wasn't cut out for it. Yet I had other girlfriends that liked it.
The compensation for the relentless tedium was the high wages. By the mid-20s, 1 in 5 Americans owned a car, a figure that Britain wouldn't equal for another 40 years.
It was a Ford Model T with a rumble seat. That's a kind of a car, black. And you take your friends out and they get blown all apart in this rumble seat. But oh, I had a lot of fun with that car.
At the end of the decade, there were already 29 million cars on America's roads, and half of them were Model Ts. The affordable car changed where people lived, where they worked, how they shopped, how they spent their leisure. Not all Americans could achieve this standard of living, but the ones who did became the envy of the rest of the world. Other nations hoped the assembly line could do the same trick for their own prosperity. Italy had only 250,000 cars in the 1920s. But Fiat in Turin was one of the first European car firms to copy Ford. Its large new plant was a wonder of its time, to be admired and recorded. From the factory's floor, spiral concrete ramps led up to a test track on the roof.